Okay, Noah, whenever you're ready.
Okay, thank you, Doris. Hello, everybody. Hello, Nicole. Hello, everyone. Great to be here in this meeting. Welcome. We don't really use land acknowledgement, but we use a lot of prayer here. So I'll use a prayer that I usually use every time I go anywhere. So I'll just do a short prayer. But Jesus Christ, tuni help to atuni akia kaneko chami tukusika kaneko chamelu. Jesus Christ, atani pilu. Amen.
Thank you very
Hello.
much.
Yeah, thank you very much. Great to be here. My name's No Papazzi again. I'm born and raised here in Iqaluit, Nunavut. I've been advocate for disability since my accident in '99. I'm a former broadcaster with Any Broadcasting Corporation. I'm a father, a grandfather of two, and born and raised here in Iqaluit. So I'm been with NDMS since the creation of NDMS. And it's great to be advocating for the services for disability, all disability, not just one sector. So I had an accident in 1999 that led me to a lot of disability, like I said, and a lot of it is through more of blindness. I got into an accident, like I said, and in 2005, my vision 2007 went kaput. So I've been learning new things. I've been advocating ever since. I learned Braille. I had a guide dog. I also learned assistive technology. I also went to independent living school. So it's been a great journey going across Canada as well as advocating for services. Nice to meet everybody.
Thank you so much. Nicole, can I turn it over to you?
Yes, thank you, Doris and Noah. And thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Nicole Diekite, and I am the Executive Director of NDMS. We are the only Indigenous cross-disability advocacy organization in Nunavut and have been, as Noah had said, doing this since 1999. We are so thankful you are here today for this discussion in recognition of National Accessibility Week. Our hope really for today is to spotlight BIPOC organizations and individuals and how they really address and respond to accessibility, especially as these voices have often been very much excluded, including NDMS. So I'm really looking forward to learning, from our amazing panelists and of course all of, you in attendance as well. And yeah, so Doris, I'll pass it back to you.
Thanks so much. So the beginning, as I said, we're going to do sort of a mix between PowerPoint presentation. I wanted to ask anybody, we have this in an accessible Word format as well. So if you would like to get a copy of the Word PowerPoint emailed to you, please let one of our hosts know. Bianca, just a quick question. We have the chat. We're not using the chat because it interferes with screen readers. Often they're trying to listen to speakers, but they're also getting everything that's going on in the chat. However, I just want to make sure, Bianca, are people able to message you directly, like the hosts?
Yes, correct.
Yeah.
So
okay. So if anybody would like the PowerPoint in a Word document, an accessible document, please let our hosts know in the chat, and that could be sent to you. Okay, and I'll be reading out the slides as well. Okay, so I'll just begin. Thank you. So as Nicole said, what we're talking about today is Black, Indigenous people of color, often known as BIPOC, with disabilities and deaf people. And what we thought we'd talk about, begin with, learning a little bit more about the great diversity amongst BIPOC people with disabilities and deaf people, learn about the barriers that these communities experience in society, And then most importantly, learn about inclusive practice when working, living, playing with BIPOC people with disabilities. I think we want to start off with just kind of visiting some of the terminology. And that's what we're going to talk about a bit, and also putting the issues in a historical context, because what's really important is some of the barriers and experiences that these populations have experienced are based on the way our society has been organized and the kinds of legislation and policies that have put in place that have placed certain groups of people in positions of marginalization. So beginning with the Indigenous peoples of so-called Canada, now known as Canada, largely, as we know, they're an extremely diverse population, hundreds of cultures and languages. Broadly have been grouped into three categories. The first one, the Inuit people, which are Indigenous people of Northern Canada, living mainly in Nunavut, Northwest Territories, Northern Quebec, and Labrador. And Ontario also has a small Inuit community. First Nations people is a broad label to talk about Indigenous people who are neither Métis nor Inuit. And this can include both status and non-status Indians, I'm putting in air quotes. This term sometimes has become confusing to use because it often is used in reference to those that have so-called status under the Indian Act legislation. So sometimes it's meant to be, it's another word that's often used to say status Indigenous people, but not always. And the Métis people are mixed with Indigenous and European ancestry. And Métis, means a person who self-identifies as a Métis, and it's distinct from other Indigenous people. They belong to the historical Métis Nation ancestry and are accepted by the Métis Nation. And we often largely refer to them having originated in Western Canada and emerged as quite a strong political force in the 19th century, which started from the Red River settlement. And I think really important that Indigenous people have been here from time immemorial. They're sovereign nations, as I said, with their own cultures, languages, economies, governments, and law. Each nation has their own culture, customs, beliefs, and traditions. And as we said, there's various legislation that was put in place, like the Royal Proclamation in 1763. And then a little fact I wanted to share was that in 1526, there was an estimated 2 million Indigenous people in Canada. And due to outbreaks of infection, diseases, loss of territory, forced relocation, very, very repressive and oppressive policy, the population dwindled down to 10,000. And very important to note that Indigenous peoples are the caretaker of the land, and as such live their responsibilities to the land and all of our relations. And just very quickly, this gives you just a bit of a history of European context starting from the 1500s. And I think the main point, and we can share this PowerPoint with people, the main point is, one second. The main point is that Indigenous people were initially exploited for their labor in the fur trade. Then when it was more important to own land, to gain ownership of the land, then more extreme measures were put in place to dispossess the original peoples off their land. And so legislation and policy by the British state and then the Canadian state, was always developed to ensure that Indigenous people could contribute when they were needed. So for example, when they needed their labor in the fur trade, but then when they needed to be controlled, more stringent policies came in place when they wanted access to their lands. So now I'm going to pause and I'm going to invite Kelly and Lana Pakopiwin up to speak. I'm going to stop sharing, and then if we could pin our two guests. There's Kelly. And just waiting on Lana, Bianca.
Yes, sorry.
There we go. No worries. That's great. So we're just gonna oh, I forgot. I've got great bios to read. One second. That's very important. So I'm going to introduce Lana and Kelly, and then I'm going to ask questions and they're going to answer the questions. So first of all, Kelly is an Indigenous frontline worker from the Reservation of Six Nations, Ontario, has worked in the housing and homeless sector for 5+ years as an advocate for Indigenous women and their families who experience intergenerational trauma from poverty, mental health, and human rights violation. Kelly has been a part of several of IRIS's projects, providing knowledge and expertise from an Indigenous perspective. When Kelly speaks, she does so not only from her personal lived experience, but on behalf of her clients, past and present and future. And Lana is Mi'kmaq Indigenous from the traditional Atlantic territory of Mi'kmaq and is also Celtic, Irish, Witch, Scottish, and German. Lana has experienced many racist and ableist and sanist comments in her life. She experienced many issues with nonprofit organizations over the years. And one solution she has is to let nonprofit organizations know that you are disabled, then ask them if they would like help in finding support specifically for disabled people. Lana feels that there is a need for more services for disabled two-spirit, intersex, and LGBTQ people, disabled Indigenous people, and in disabled women. So welcome both. I'm just going to begin with you, Kelly. Just can you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and anything you want to share?
So Sago, but I'm Mohawk. I am from, as Doris mentioned, the Reserve of Six Nations, which is in Ontario. Like she mentioned, I've done frontline and also lived experiences of my own. I am a residential school survivor. My father's parents and sister were part of the residential schools. I grew up on reservation as well as went to school on reservation. And then later on in my life, I actually moved away from my reserve and went to school and so forth. So I'm really honored to be here today to hear not only my fellow panelists, but also to, hear from everyone that's in attendance today. So thank you for having me.
Thanks, Kelly. Lana.
I'm here.
Hi, do you want to share anything you want about your background and anything you want to share about your experiences?
Yeah, sure, please. To make a correction about the bio, that one where you read as Celtic is actually Celtic.
Oh, Thank you.
And well, I have had experiences with people not being patient to patients with explaining things in a way that I would be able to understand them better. I've had experiences with having ableist comments said to me, and with non-profit organizations, and when with many people not understanding my disabilities, and not understanding that for some things it is better that I have services that are specifically for disabled people. Now, one correction to my bio, because I wrote out my bio, and then when you edit it, it was a little bit different than how I originally edited it. When I originally typed it out, I said, as for racism, I haven't experienced, I have not experienced as much as some other indigenous people have, but I have experienced some, like I've had experiences with someone hassling me on Facebook because of my indigeneity. And there was one time when I was walking down the street wearing an indigenous styled coat and wearing my medicine bag, and a bunch of white men construction workers were making some indigenous chants as a way to make fun of me. And there was one time when I was hiking in the Guildwood Park way, and this older white man came up to me and started hassling me, and then yelled out a racist slur at me. When I was hiking in the Guildwood Parkway that time, I was wearing a lawn skirt and wearing my medicine bag.
Right, yeah, that must have made you feel really horrible.
Absolutely. But you know, in the indigenous community, though, I have had some experiences with some indigenous people not wanting to recognize me as an indigenous person because I am mixed with both indigenous and European, or assuming that I'm not indigenous. And I do feel that certainly because of my lighter skin and blue eyes, I do experience more privilege than darker skin indigenous people who would be more visibly indigenous than me. But I have certainly had some experiences with racism because of my indigeneity.
Kelly, I wonder, is there anything you want to add to that around experiences that you may have had personally, but also as a frontline worker with the women and men you work with?
Personally, one thing that really sits to this day, it really wasn't a good experience. So I'm actually a new mom. My son's going to be 2 in a few months. So There's a hospital in Toronto that my doctor referred me to. They did the intake. They go through your background, your basically your whole medical background, right from the get-go. So I was open with the doctor doing the intake with me that I had years and years ago before I started on my healing journey, that I struggled with alcohol, substance abuse quite heavily. And I was open about it. And the doctor, and I'm never going to forget this, pretty much focused on that, and also mentioned, and it put a lot of fear and anxiety in me, that my child, that they look in your background when you have if you giving my background, they told me that you might be at risk of your child being flagged for the children's services to come visit you in the hospital to make sure your child's safe to go home with you.
Huh.
So I couldn't help but, and a lot of the demeanor changed when I was going to a lot of describing like how I got out of that situation, was working with healers and things. I could already tell the doctors just body language, like, okay, here we go. Like, so I kind of couldn't help but have that sit with me. And it wasn't, and it was educating the doctor as to my understanding, and that I didn't start learning about myself and following my traditional culture till I start finding culture. Because before I had the loss of culture. So like I was trying to find my way, trying to find who I was, and I didn't really understand about colonization and all that back then, but to where I am, today. So that's something that's really sat with me. And in terms of my professional experience, I've gone with example, I've gone to, say, Ontario Works, which is social assistance with clients before, just to help advocate. Had their workers look down on them, or using comments like, well, don't you get into school for free, or don't you got free education because you're Native. So it's shutting a lot of that stigma down. And also too, using your status card when you go shopping for like groceries, I've had a lot of comments or eyes rolled. So it really sits with you. But it's trying to educate those that that don't know, as well as, so I have both a physical and intellectual disability. A lot of it stemmed from past traumas that I've been through. So, and again, colonization too, as well, and the loss of culture and the self-identity. So people make comments like, okay, well, again, you're Native, they got good health care, you guys all get stuff for free, or I don't understand why you're like that. So it's having to, the shutting down of always having to justify myself in my situation, without, going into full detail with people that maybe I don't know. As same thing with clients that I work with as well, is to just, show that we're able, or people look at you, oh, I didn't think you have a disability. You don't seem like the kind that would, have PTSD or ADHD. And so I hear a lot of this stuff on the regular, not just with the people I work with, but for myself as well, when I open up to them. So, yeah, I hope that answers.
So it's so helpful. Thank you so much for sharing that, Kelly. It's so helpful when you're talking about, like, your healing journey and the kind of work you've drawn from your old cultural healing, but also, just knowing you and how you've just become such a spokesperson around understanding that, how disability and all that you experienced, based on the intergenerational trauma, being Indigenous, and how that has come together, and how you can't, one thing you always talk about is that, sometimes you can't separate it, right? Like there's assumptions. I wonder if you could share more about that, like how people you did a bit, but how they have assumptions about you and others when they see you on the streets and etc.
I get a lot of people, a lot of times this happens to me, come up, oh, are you Native? Like, yes, like, why are you asking? Because sometimes it does put a barrier up, because you don't know what how that person's going to react. Or oh, you're Native, well, like my grandma was like an Indian princess and all that. Or are you Indian? That's the other thing I let people know, like, it's Indigenous or First Nations, it's not Indian. That's the name that the settlers had given us, but that's not what it is. And the other thing is just having my guard up. Most of the time, being an Indigenous individual, especially an Indigenous woman, because we're targeted, those that might be familiar with the Murder Missing Indigenous Women and the issues going on within Canada that we're all trying to fight. So it's always the guards up, making assumptions again, like mental health, because the stigma of alcohol, we're all Natives are alcoholics, we're all drugs, like we deserve whatever we get over it. I've been told that a lot, and that's it's a very sensitive subject for a lot of us, not just myself. It's something we can't get over, so that I face a lot of that, but I'm trying to do it in a positive way, because I'm trying to show my son that if he's ever faced, because he's both myself and his father, like, we're both Indigenous, so I'm trying to teach him to be proud of who he is, and that if he ever faces to barriers, like, to deal with it like in a positive way, but to always be proud of who he is no matter what. So having barriers of a disability, both physical, intellectual, and then being Indigenous, it's a lot sometimes to carry, but I've been trying to learn, like I said, positive ways to kind of deal with it. But at the end of the day, I just want people to understand and respect that with the Indigenous culture, be more mindful of the sensitivity as to the issues that a lot of us Indigenous individuals face. And also respect culture. We all don't want to be on meds either. And that's another, I could go on about that, but I know we're kind of.
Yeah. Well, no, that's great. And this, Lana and Kelly, you can both respond to this, but Kelly, I know, worked on a project that we did on trafficking and Indigenous women with intellectual disabilities. And when you're talking, Kelly, and with the project, that a lot of people with so-called invisible disabilities, right? We found in our work that they're more vulnerable to predators, to sexual exploitation, etc. I don't know if either one of you wants to share a bit about that. Do you have anything to add to that, Lana? We did I don't think you were involved in it a bit, but Kelly was more involved in it, where we had a kind of a support group at the Native Women's Resource Center here in Toronto that was looking at women that live with invisible disabilities. And just in terms of Indigenous women specifically, our gender diverse people, and just how vulnerable they were, because people felt that they could take more advantage of that. I don't know, Kelly, in your work as a worker, have you seen that as well?
Yeah, it's quite heavy. So example with like most places in Canada, there's housing specifically for Indigenous individuals, like, you know, rent geared to income, affordable housing, where people take advantage of these individuals. Oh, because I can't find a place to live. Well, I or take over. They call it a unit takeover, which is basically maybe they meet someone, they move them in with them, if it's a friend, family member, or whatnot, and that person takes over the unit completely. And that person can't really do anything. So they feel unsafe in their home. They might not stay. I've worked with women that that have fled because, you know, they meet somebody, for example, and the person he or she just, they seem really nice, and then the end they start getting abusive, and then, you know, they're
Yeah.
targeting these women verbally, emotionally, physically abusing them of all sorts. So I've heard a lot of, as a worker perspective, I've heard a lot of heartbreaking stories, and that, you know, so that's one way that they do take advantage of them.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. We're gonna see Lana and Kelly. Did you want to add to that, Lana? I saw you pop up.
Well, I have dealt with predators who would act creepy towards me, both in person and on Facebook and Instagram, and I happen to be a sex worker, and just this year, when a John reached out to me, he told me that he has a 16-year-old daughter who's a trans woman, and he asked me if it was okay for him to have his 16-year-old daughter present while I did a session with him. And then I yelled at him and said, no, I am not okay with you having a 16-year-old girl present while I do sessions with you. Now I am blocking your phone number. Goodbye. And I hung up the phone on him, and I blocked his phone number. And well, also, I have a cousin, and many years ago, they got into a relationship with this man. He seemed very nice at first, but then a few years later, when they decided to move that boyfriend in with them, he then started to take over their house completely, and then became verbally abusive, and was going around going around punching holes in their walls, throwing things across the room, smashing things. And there was one time when he was physically abusive towards them. He pinned them to the ground and caused them to end up with a black eye, and then their daughter went to defend her parent, and her parent's boyfriend said to them, "You better get your daughter off me right now or I will hurt her.
Wow,
And
Lana,
yeah,
that's
and
really
then
difficult.
and then their daughter suggested to them that they report him to the police, and so they reported him to the police, and somehow this situation got back to Native Child and Family Services, and then Native Child and Family Services took their flesh and blood daughter and their stepson away into the care of Native Child. And then there was another time when this man threw monster drinks at them, but luckily them and this man broke up, and this man is no longer living with them and is out of their life. That's all.
Right.
Well, Len.
So Lana, what I'm hearing you share that's very, very difficult. And thank you for sharing it. But I'm hearing that with the both scenarios, with you working as a sex worker, but also in this family, that there were special vulnerability, right? Like you felt special vulnerability because of being Indigenous. I'm not sure, in addition to having a disability, if that was some of it, but certainly you were very vulnerable to predators and whatnot, but you seem to handle it very well in terms of shutting it down for yourself personally. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
Okay.
Len.
Great.
Yeah, I would say it is in addition to having a disability.
Okay. Well, thank you both. We'll be bringing you back again. And I'm just going to go on with the the presentation, and we'll see you in a couple of minutes. Okay, so now I've got to share. And what I want to do now is moving on to some other communities in the BIPOC family. So just a little context around people of African descent, Black communities in Canada. I think it's not very well known, but it is becoming increasingly known that Black people have been in Canada since the 1600s, 1606. They originally came as slaves and indentured servants. And of course, after the American Revolution, which a lot of African-American people fought in, they were invited, I'm using air quotes, to come and settle in Canada, and they're referred to as the Black Loyalists, who largely settled in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. The War of 1812, we did see some Black communities settle in the prairies in the West, but not as much as in Southern Ontario through the Underground Railroad, which occurred in the 1800s, where people largely settled in Ontario. And of course, today, the majority of Black immigrants are coming from the Caribbean and various African countries. And so just to talk a little bit about the Black deaf experience, we have, and I'm going to ask Andrea to come up, and I will give you an introduction to Andrea, if Andrea can be pinned. There we are, one moment. So Andrea is the founder of Deaf Events and Beyond Inc., which is located in Brampton, Ontario, which she established in 2014. And this organization, Deaf Events and Beyond Inc., is dedicated to empowering the deaf community and bridging societal gaps through inclusive events, welcoming both deaf and hearing participants. Her efforts have earned recognition, including features on CTV News, accolades such as the Young Professional of the Year Award in 2018, recognition from the Brampton Board of Trade, Top 40 Under 40 in 2019, Additionally, she's received honors such as the Brampton Accessibility and Business Award, the Brampton Board of Trades Business Excellence Community Builder in 2022. Her achievements have also earned her awards globally, with the recognition from Canada International Black Women Excellence as one of the top 100 Black women to watch in 2022. She's been featured on breakfast television and in women influence publications. And Andrea is a founding member of Black Deaf Canada. She advocates for inclusion and accessibility while mentoring deaf and hard of hearing entrepreneurs. Pretty amazing, Andrea. Welcome and thank you so much for joining this panel. I wonder, Andrea, if you could just begin by sharing anything more you want to about yourself, and also just telling us about some of the challenges and experiences that you and or the people you support have lived with. Oh, Jen, I think you're muted.
Okay, 1 second. And I'm just having a problem seeing because of the gallery. So I'm trying, well, 1 second, I just have to shift one thing. Okay, just so I can see Andrea more clear now because the gallery was blocking her. So, okay, sorry, go start again. I identify, so for me for the people watching, I'm a Black woman. I have a black jacket on with a blue and orange multicolor patterned shirt on. I've got gold earrings and I'm wearing glasses. They're a little bit purple if you can see with a light gold arm on it. So thank you very much for that introduction. My name sign is Andrea. So when you see someone doing that, that means me. I was born in Jamaica, moved to Canada when I was 12. And when I was born, I was hearing, I could hear, but then I actually became deaf around the age of 6. And then after a time, by 25, fully deaf. And around that time, well, being hard of hearing, I could hear a little bit, when I was about 13, but I grew up very oral. So trying to lip read, and most of the time, I mean, that's hard when you're 13. I did have a hearing aid. And when I finally got the hearing aid, I could hear birds and I could hear all these things around me that it actually made me cry. But then at 25, that's when my world changed. I was, that's when they said, yes, you were fully deaf, and I lost my job. I was a hotel restaurant manager working at that time. The name of the company was Best Western Hotel, and I worked at the front desk and never had problems with jobs before. I could speak somewhat. And when I became fully deaf, I realized that, oh yes, I always had deaf friends who complained that they couldn't find work and they couldn't get a job. And I thought, well, maybe you're just not trying hard enough. And then all of a sudden that was my experience. And I thought, wow, I went to all these job interviews, but I never got hired. And in that moment, I thought, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? How am I going to make money? Am I going to have to stay home? What am I going to do? And so I applied for a personal support worker in the deaf community. And when I finally got involved in the deaf community, it was a whole open world to me. The culture, it was a culture shock that I had to learn that along the way. But one problem I had was the deaf community was not really wanting to give me a warm welcome, because I'm a Black woman and I grew up oral, so lip reading and trying to do all of that, not signing. So I didn't feel very accepted at first. And I was trying to figure out, am I oral deaf? Am I a deaf, strong sign language learner? So, someone had said, well, why don't you go to this one school? And at the time I thought, no, I'm fine. I'm fine with who I am. I accept, how I am learning, and I'll grow into things later on. And, I have to accept who I am today. And quite often people see me and think that I'm a Black woman and ignorant and being deaf. And then I start to speak a little bit and it throws people off. And so it's been quite a challenge and quite a journey for me. And then after starting this company, hearing people, sorry, 1 second. They would see me first and then recognize my work and recognize everything I was doing. And then later on, it was the deaf community that really started to see what I was doing and recognize what I was doing as well. And, you know, I then was feeling welcomed by them. The first, you know, the number one challenge for me was signing, because sometimes I will try and sign and speak at the same time. And if there was, the deaf community would sort of brush me off and said, you've got it, you know, we don't like that. And that's not kind of what we do. So it's been a huge journey for me getting through all these barriers. And first of all, it was a job, and then also working with interpreters, having to hire interpreters for workshops and meetings. Most of the time hearing people will say, sorry, no, we don't provide interpreters for that, or we don't have the resources. And so that is a huge frustration. So as a business owner, it was not easy dealing with that. You know, there was a lot of reading I had to do. And one awful experience I had was to try and convince businesses and write a budget. And at that time, you know, getting to the top, I got to the top 3 and I didn't make it because there were 3 different judges who criticized my business plan. And they said, you know, deaf people, it's not appropriate to use the word deaf. It's not appropriate. And I thought, wow, you know, they're judging me just for my identity right off the bat. And so that didn't make me feel good. I was not happy with that. And being very direct, I said, well, who? And they said, well, it's confidential. We can't tell you who makes these decisions. So it was a lot of advocating. And I tried getting my business plan out there, but in their opinion of who I was, I lost opportunities along the way. And so that, wow. So I finally won a case, and I was able to, you know, I put a lawsuit in. I didn't win what I wanted to, but you know, that's okay. I won money, and that was quite an experience that really impacted me. And as a deaf Black woman, I, you know, felt very vulnerable, and I thought, wow, you know, I have those leadership skills. I have skills, but it was just, you know, I could have just sat back and went, oh, this is what life is throwing at me. But I thought, no, I can't. You know, hearing people judge me for just looking at me or seeing, you know, when they find out that I'm deaf, I want to change the opinions of people and not have that as a barrier right off the bat. So it's been quite a journey and a lot to celebrate as I look back. And I am very proud of who I am today. And I have to, now it's my turn to advocate for those younger than me who are the up and comers.
Thank you so much, Andrea. I just wanted one clarification and then to ask you a question. So they said when they were looking at your business plan that it wasn't appropriate to use the word deaf? Like they were questioning the label?
Yes.
Wow. How did you understand that?
Well, they said I should have used hearing impaired.
Oh, okay. That's first I've heard of that. I wanted you to share briefly something that you had talked about, you and somebody else had talked about, which I thought was really, really important to share. Just that, you know, how diverse the deaf community is across this country. For example, in the East Coast, there's a certain accent, right? And you can tell where people are from. There's a national sense. Can you talk a bit about that? Because I think, you know, people that aren't familiar with diversity in many ways, right? Ethno-racial diversity, regional diversity. Are you able to talk a bit about that? And the importance of getting interpreters in the hearing community that reflect that diversity. That's what I learned from you.
Yes, yes, that's right. Sure, I can do that. Really, the deaf community is quite varied. And at the moment, we have so many immigrants that are moving in from different countries. You know, when you see deaf people moving, they have language deprivation, meaning English is not their first language. ASL is not, American Sign Language is not their first language. They use their sign language from their country. So it is an immense challenge for us, for anyone working with deaf members. Like myself, I was from Jamaica, but I don't know Jamaican Sign Language. I should, but I don't know. It's called JSL. But there's a Black sign language that is just this innate part of us already. You know, if you move to maybe another island like Barbados or Trinidad or something along those lines, they have their own sign language as well, and their own culture, their own facial expressions, and very different from white Canadians. Sorry, my daughter here. Okay, I will. Just a moment. Give me a moment. So yes, it's very important to be aware that American Sign Language, or ASL, has different accents for sure. And right across Canada, Nova Scotian people sign differently than Ontario people, and sign different. Maybe they've moved from the States and they sign just like a mile a minute compared to other Canadian signers. So whenever you meet a deaf or hard of hearing person, please be patient. Maybe, you know, we have to understand each person, and each person has their own culture and sign within them as well.
Thank you. And another myth that I think hearing people have is they think that LSQ is French, ASL is English, right? And I think that is a myth that you could maybe tell us
Well,
about.
English and French, yeah, they are very different. So Montreal in Quebec has their French Sign Language. Yes.
Right. But I think what people think is if you use ASL, you automatically know English. And there's not a recognition, it's a second language.
Well, some people in Quebec, they know both. But I don't know LSQ. I don't know French Sign Language. So you can learn LSQ for sure, and ASL, but I just personally don't happen to know French Sign Language. Like say if you want to book an interpreter, especially at a national level, the person absolutely is required to know both LSQ and ASL, both. The French Sign Language and English Sign or ASL, because it's a national level. So maybe the person is going to go back and forth. And so you need to know at that level, if you're interpreting, you need to know both languages. But also for me, when I book an interpreter, quite often, you know, I'm not super picky about it has to be this or it has to be that, but I do want to work with an interpreter who matches my personality. And that is extremely important to me. That is extremely important. Someone that can show and bring out your personality. If they're very vivacious and excited, if that's how you're signing, I want the interpreter to come across their voice like I am. And so then it's almost like the interpreter is not in the room. And you know, with hearing people, sorry, to back up. It's if I'm really excited, the interpreter needs to sound excited as well. So you really have to be able to match what I'm trying to bring across.
Okay, great. Thank you. And I guess the thing I was trying to get at is I think hearing people assume if you know ASL, you know English, right? That English is your first language, ASL is your first language. But I've met deaf people where English is definitely their second language. Right?
Correct, because ASL it's a very different language compared to English. Most people who are born deaf and have never heard English, ASL will be their first language. And then they have to learn English along the way. So if children have not had the opportunity and had the access to hear the language, it will impact. They will be language deprived. Same with me. I was hard of hearing. I didn't hear. And so I still struggled with language and I had to learn a lot. And, you know, I went to speech therapy, but that didn't really work. And they had me practicing all these different writing and this and that. But it's very different when you hear a language or see a language. Yes, there's a lot of work that we still need to do. And then, you know, people have to remember that deaf people are human as well. And we're screaming for support regarding access. You know, deaf people need to be asking for accommodations, and maybe they don't want an interpreter. Maybe there's some deaf people that don't know how to sign and they prefer to use the closed captioning. So each person has their individual preferences. And same with me. I didn't know how to sign at first. And so I required relying on the closed captioning. But now, because I'm so involved in the deaf community, one thing that is the most important to me was the sign language. It helped me an awful lot. But now I can go back and forth because I was part of the hearing world and I'm part of the deaf world. And so I can accommodate those transitions, but it all depends on the person's background, their education, where they grew up, the accommodations that they've had. And so everyone, if they're provided those accommodations, everyone will win.
Great. Thank you so much, Andrea. We'll be bringing you back to when we go to the panel. Thank you. That was wonderful.
You're welcome. Thank you.
So again, I'm just going to give a little context on another BIPOC population, looking at the history of immigration in our country. As some of you obviously know, that our country has been built on immigration policies that were racialized. Immigration policy was really a key instrument for giving the most laborious economic tasks to what was referred to as non-preferred peoples, and I'm using air quotes, while at the same time making sure that non-white populations would not settle in Canada. So they could come to do the work, build the railroads, etc., but they weren't allowed to stay. And there's still such a pronounced racism and ableism in immigration policies. As I was saying, historically racialized people could come and build the country, but they couldn't stay. There's a lot of racism, sexism, and ableist policies that lead to quite a lot of barriers to safety. For example, there's a live-in caregivers policy, which a lot of racialized women come in through. The so-called crackdown on illegal immigrants has created very unsafe circumstances, particularly for women and related to that, undocumented migrants. You may have heard specifically relating to people with disabilities in immigration, the excessive demand stipulation. In the early 1900s, Canadian immigration laws were very discriminatory. For example, this is some language that came right out of the Act. Medical officers were allowed to deport migrants that they considered, and I'm using air quotes, lunatics, idiotic, deaf and dumb, blind, or infirmed. And today, people with disabilities are still banned from immigrating to Canada if the government thinks their disability would cause excessive demand on the healthcare or social services in Canada. There are some exceptions to this. And as we know, many advocacy groups are working to remove the excessive demand policy altogether. And now I'm going to invite B. So to come up. And join us. And I will introduce B. I'll give a moment to get B pinned. There we are, B. So B. Lee Soy is a relentless and fearless anti-poverty advocate for housing, transit, food security, employment, and social assistance. To bring a policy and systemic change through extensive lived experiences of homelessness and poverty. She's a frequent public speaker, currently a vital member of the City of Toronto Housing Right Advocacy Committee, Toronto Alliance to End Homelessness, Toronto Public Health and Homelessness Advisory Working Group, St. Michael's Hospital MAP Community Expert Group on Homelessness, Housing, and Health. Previously, she lent her expertise to the City of Toronto's Poverty Reduction Strategy Lived Experience Advisory Group and the federal government's Ministerial Advocacy Committee on Poverty. Her contributions were instrumental in the development of the first National Poverty Reduction Strategy, marking a significant milestone in Canada's fight against poverty. B has been honored with Everyday Political Citizen Award and from the Samara Center for Democracy and the Queen Elizabeth II Platinum Jubilee Pin, acknowledging her relentless pursuit of democracy and her impact on community well-being. B is also, we're so proud to say, a member of the local Safety and Inclusion Solidarity Network in Toronto, which brings a lot of diverse groups of women and gender diverse people together. So welcome, B. I wonder if you could begin by just telling us a little bit about your history in Canada, when you came and what that was like.
Thank you, Doris, for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. I am born and raised in Malaysia. And Malaysia has two parts, west and east. But I belong to the west side. So it's close, just a neighbor of Singapore. Yeah. And I came here in the 1980, December 29. And yeah, it was quite an experience from a hot country coming to Canada. It was like winter time. That time it was like long time ago. It was like minus 15, 20, 25, you know. And I came here as only wearing a t-shirt. And yeah, but thank God my friend have a jacket for me, the winter jacket for me. So I didn't catch a cold. So when I came, I had no English at all. No English. Because back home, English school is a private school. You have to pay for it. So I go to public school, so I didn't really learn English. Well, we had English classes, but it's like even teacher talk to her in Chinese. So you hardly can really learn English. So I know basic English, like, you know, good morning, good afternoon, those kind of thank you, you know, basic, very basic one, but not really able to talk. Not really able to talk in like communicate in English. So it was very hard when I came. But I had a friend who came before me, and so I was like depending on my friend who are in that. I came because I came in a private school, international school. So my friend came before me, so I kind of like depend on them to, you know, deal with anything that I need to deal with. It was hard, but then later the private school want to increase school fee. I already pay for the school fees, so I decided not to pay. And then so I was thinking of moving to changing to girls' school. But then that time it was really expensive, the girls' school, the Catholic school. And then to one of the friends, so I got to know there's a free school in Ottawa, and it's free because they use the taxes to pay for that. So we don't have to pay, it's free for international students. But I think it's God's timing and God's provision, because when I went into the only requirements, you have to find a place, a house near the school. So when I've got a place near the school, so and when I get into that school, totally they say no more free school for international students. So I can really say that it's God's permission that that I still can continue school without paying the private school. So that one is so because I don't have English, so I had to start all from high school.
Wow, that's rough, B. I just wonder, just to fast forward, because there's so much you have to say. But I wonder if you could just tell us, like, all your advocacy work, but your situation with housing, if we fast forward to the last few years.
Yeah. So I got my high school, and then I got my university, and then but as a visa student, because my status is a visa student, so I can work in Canada. I want to continue to study, and I don't want to bother my parents again, because they already support me all this year in university, because we cannot work at a time. Long time ago, we cannot work. It's only study. And so I thought myself, if I can find a job, then I will stay and continue my master's degree. If not, then I'll go back. And there's no job for international student. So the only job that I could get at that time, it was under immigration, that kind of program. It's like how live-in domestic worker or nanny. So you work as a nanny or housekeeper, and then after 2 years, then you're allowed to apply for immigrant. So I did that, and that was hard. It was hard, and I thought I could go to school, but I couldn't, because if my employer did come back on time, so I can go to school, because I can just dump the kid there, right? It's not right for me to do that. So I could go to school, but then I took the Montessori school online, so I was able to complete that. So when I after that, I got into and then I become an immigrant, and then later on I became a citizen. So now I'm a citizen, and so to cut it short, and so all this time, after I got my immigrant, I can do any job I want. I don't have to stick to the nanny job anymore. So I did a Montessori teacher. I was a Montessori teacher at that time, and then after that, God called me to be a missionary to Japan. So I had to study seminary, and I don't have money for that, right? So so I really work hard, and after God, that's a lot of things. God, I see the God's provision and God's hand on me. So all this year I work hard. So I didn't really get involved with the community, right? Because Monday to Friday I work, and it's a long commute. I get out of my house at 7:30. I don't come back until 7:30, almost like 12 hours. And so weekend, then I go to church, go do grocery, laundry, like sorry, 2 days, day off is already gone. So I didn't really get involved in the community. The only thing I know is like library that sometimes I go there.
So B, sorry to interrupt, but remember I told you I might be pushing a bit. I just wondered if you could just kind of fast forward and just tell us a bit about, like, your situation right now, that you share a lot when we're in groups and stuff, like, what you're dealing with the housing issues. And we know you're a great advocate of these things. In fact, I think right after this, you're being interviewed by the Toronto Star, but are you wanting to share any about that, about the housing? You don't have to, but.
Yeah, I could say that, but I want to talk a little bit. Is because background is because of that.
Yes.
So when I mean when I the rent want the rent was expensive, so I want to find a cheaper rent. So I give 1 month notice, but after 1 month I couldn't find a place, so I was put right onto the street on Thanksgiving Day, and it was hard because, as I say, I tell you all before, that I know nothing about what's out there in the society, what's out there in the community, any resources. I had no idea. So when I was put on the street, it was very hard. I don't even know. I don't even know there's a shelter to go. I don't even know there's a library. You can use free phone. You can use computer. And so the only thing I know is how I'm going to keep myself safe. Safe on the street. So 24 hours Tim Horton came to my mind. And that time it's not that many Tim Horton that have open 24 hours. But I finally located one, and I was able to stay there. And then that time I was my first homeless. I was working full time. I had a full time job, but because of low wages, I couldn't pay high rent. So I was like staying in the Tim Horton, and then in the morning I go to washroom, wash up, and then I go to work. But because I couldn't sleep much, so I lost concentration in my workplace, and then I got laid off. So I lost my job. Because of that, then so I there's no income coming, so I was like spending all my saving. I'm not a big spender, so I was able to save some, even though I don't have a big salary. And so to a point, I remember it's Christmas time, I run out of money, and I didn't know where do they drop in, have free food to eat, that kind of thing. I know nothing. And so I was like 10 days hungry without food, just drinking water. And then somebody, got an angel. Somebody knew my situation and say, you cannot live your life like that. So the person led me to social assistant and apply, help me to apply for Ontario Works. And because of Ontario Works, I was able to find a place, not a good place. It's peculiar, but at least there's something on my roof, over my roof, so that I don't have to be on the street. But because so peculiar, my health is not good. I remember it was so damp and cold, and mold. I cannot walk. It was okay when I moved in, but then the landlord it's not professional. He fixed the bathroom exhaust, and all the dampness came to my room. So it was so damp, my leg couldn't walk, and I supposed to move out, but I tolerated for 5 years, knowing that when I move, I'll be homeless again. So I tolerated, and finally, until one point, I just like ridiculous. So I moved, and then I moved to that place, a new place, and it was okay. And then, but my next room, they didn't close the window, and then the landlord watered the backyard vegetable, and the pipe broke, and all the water seeped into my neighbor's, my next room. And then because my room is lower, so you all seep into my room. But the landlady denied that my room is flooded. So
Mhm.
I had to sit and sleep, because basement, it takes a long time to dry up. Yeah.
So be sorry, just gonna have to move on, but save that thought because we're bringing you back at the end with all the other panelists, because I know these horrible conditions you lived in, you kept kind of going from one bad situation to another, right? And you can share more about that when we come back. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. We'll bring you back. Okay.
Mhm.
Thanks. Okay. It's hard because everybody just has so much to share. And as you'll hear, B has worked a lot around not only living homelessness and housing precarity, but also working with the city and various levels of government to try to change things. So as we were hearing that BIPOC people with disabilities and deaf people, they have the same challenges as Indigenous, racialized, and migrant people, which is poverty, economic insecurity. We're hearing about that, difficulty of getting work, difficult to find work, discrimination, often in the form of racism, and the high cost of education. Bea was sharing a bit about that. Many immigrant and refugee people live in overcrowded and very poor housing. So to continue, BIPOC migrant people have racism, discrimination. They don't have English or French, as Bea was also sharing. There's new stresses to the family structure, very much concerned about their immigration status. And life is really different in Canada compared to a lot of different countries. It's a long day. It's hard to find time for family, and the winter weather, again, as we heard Bea offer, is very difficult for many new immigrants and newcomers. And the historical colonial practices and present day impacts. So when we looked at the history of immigration in this country, we could see that set the stage for some of the relationships that still exist today in new forms. Many mental health stressors for migrant people: isolation, loneliness, depression, sadness, feelings of insecurity. Often there's expectation from their families back home that are not being met. And there's a sense that their traditions are disappearing. Many, many migrant people are refugees, and they come from very traumatic pre-migration experiences that also leads to disability. And when you talk about BIPOC migrant women plus having a disability or being from the deaf community, they have the same stressors, but they have even higher poverty rates, greater rates of unemployment and underemployment. They have very low educational achievement, and that is because of inaccessible educational systems, which we heard Andrea share a bit about. And this all leads to poor mental and physical health. And one of the biggest things is a very increased vulnerability to violence, particularly gender-based violence. And the system, it doesn't work for them. Services and benefits failed to meet people's unique needs. Disability-related costs are very high. Products, services, and supports, which are not covered by many provincial disability benefits. And women with disabilities are 3 times more likely to rely on government programs than both non-disabled women and disabled men, which are well below the poverty line to begin with. So if you're deaf and disabled and are Indigenous, racialized, or a newcomer, you're even poorer. So for the deaf community, we know that they earn significantly less than the Canadian average income. And employers can be reluctant, as we heard Andrea share, to hire deaf workers because of the assumption about the communication difficulties or meeting their workplace needs would impose financial strain is often what we heard. And there's a real ignorance and lack of budgeting for accommodation costs to include the deaf community. So very quickly, I want to share some ways that we can work to be more inclusive to BIPOC, deaf and disabled people, and then we'll go back to our panel. So often when we talk about an inclusive approach, we talk about an approach that's trauma-informed, it's strength-based, and it's survivor-centered. So by trauma-informed, we really just mean an approach that recognizing that distressing experiences can have an impact on your behavior, your mental health, and the decisions you make. So key to this approach is understanding the historically shaped roots and systems in society that keep that trauma in place for certain groups. And certainly Kelly and Lana spoke about that in their own experiences. So again, just to remember history to modern day, racialized immigration policies that set the condition of relationships in society, Indigenous policies, the Indian Act, developed in direct relationship to the need to control labor, lands, and resources, segregation, and genocide, example, the PASS system, residential schools, and the 60s scoop. Slavery of African people, resulting in intergenerational trauma from extreme violence and the destruction of nations, African nations, families, languages, and cultures. And then, of course, the policy of mass institutionalization for people with disabilities, particularly people with intellectual disabilities in the deaf community, resulting in exploitation, physical and sexual violence. And so a strength-based approach is grounded in a set of beliefs that all people have skills and capabilities and can learn, make decisions, and solve problems if the proper supports are in place. A strength-based approach focuses on what a person can do, not what they cannot do. And supporters need to put the proper supports in place that people need to nurture and grow their personal strengths. So when we talk about person, our survivor-centered approach means to see the person first and not define the person as a Black, Indigenous, immigrant, racialized, and/or deaf or disabled person. There's so much diversity within all those broad categories, as we've just been hearing. And so we can focus on inclusive practice in the area of working directly with people, this idea in your work, in your community, even in your neighborhood, to establish peer groups, to bring people that are often segregated together. And then there's ways to create an inclusive environment. I'm just going to really quickly go through this, but there's a lot more information we could share about this if people are interested. But for example, if you have a service, and Lana talked a bit about that in the edited bio that she gave me, but really prepare for having a person with a disability ahead of time and asking them what they need. So give person-centered anti-oppression and deaf and disability-sensitive service. Practice inclusive communication. So allow for a person to bring a support person of their choice, really important, to be present in any meeting, occasion, workshop, or service. And ensure, as Andrea said, that interpreters are there and are booked well ahead of time. And the idea of a peer group is, we heard through our research and just our groups that we do in the community, is really important so people can share experiences, advocacy work and opportunities, and to learn to start bringing their issues to the table like our guests today. Exchange information on accessibility programs and activities, and learn about the supports that are available in your community, and have fun. One of the biggest things we always heard is anything you do, make sure that there's a joyful and fun element to it. So now that's the end of sort of the presentational component. So we're going to bring all the panel members back. And just very quickly, they're going to share a little bit about some of their ideas on what needs to be done. And we're going to keep it short so that we can open it up to everybody that's here. You can ask a question to any of the panelists that you want or share a comment. That would be really great. So Lana, Kelly, Andrea, and B. There's B. It's like magic. Lana, Kelly, and Andrea. Welcome back, everyone. So we're just going to talk really quickly for about 5 minutes so that we can hear from our guests, our audience, so that they have an opportunity to ask you questions. But is there anything that you would like to share in terms of what needs to be done, what you think is the most critical thing? And maybe you could just kind of summarize it, and then we can open it up for discussion. Does anybody want to share ideas on best practice, solutions, inclusive practice? Can I pick on you, Kelly, first? You don't have to answer this either. We can just turn it out to the audience.
Can you just repeat the question?
Just what do you think needs to be done to be more inclusive?
Education in terms of, you know, having those of us that have lived experience sit at these tables, especially when it comes to the government policies that are being made. I think we would see a lot more positive change for those of us that are in these marginalized communities. I also think, there should be more education in schools too, so that, you know, kids know, you know, like the issues going on, and you know, just having that understanding and just hearing from those of us with experience and know that, you know, we are the experts on this when it comes to these kind of issues that we talked about here today. So, you know, let us be the ones to say what's needed. So I think it's having trust in one another, and, you know, just continue and band together too. It doesn't, you know, the more we all come together, there's powers in numbers. I'm a big believer in that. I think just continue to have things like we are today on the panel, as well, to educate, you know, everyone maybe that doesn't know or wants to know more. So I'll leave it at that.
That's
and give
great.
a
Thank
chance.
you. I'm gonna go to the group and then we'll come back and hear if Andrea B and Lana want to add something. I saw Parvarthi, your hand was up. Did you want to have a comment or ask the panel a question?
Yes. You know, I do a psychosocial education to the Tamil community every 2 weeks about issues affecting them in Canada, especially mental health and addiction and various other areas. So even Kelly was in our group once, and also I invited somebody from Saskatchewan for that group. So there was a question from a man from our community. Well, these people are, you know, the wrong time, the wrong place. That's why they are getting into trouble. This is about, you know, about women they were talking about. And this man was, you know, this is not just question. It is a question from many immigrants in this country. they don't understand what trauma that the indigenous people have gone through. So I feel that, you know, broader education is very, very important about indigenous people to other immigrant communities. That also should be focused, you know, when someone is planning any conference, or I mean, it's not about conference, and also the media. Media must play a big role in this area. That's what I'm asking.
Thanks, Parati. That's great. Andrea, Lana, or B, is there anything you want to share in terms of what you think is needed to make
Well,
change happen?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, as you already read in my bio, if someone who comes to a nonprofit organization lets that nonprofit organization know that they are disabled, then that nonprofit organization needs to offer to help them find services that are more eligible for disabled people, and there is a need for more services that are specific to disabled, two-spirit, intersex, and LGBTQ people, more services that are specific to disabled indigenous people, and more services that are specific to disabled women, and also there also more education is absolutely needed.
That's great, Lana. So we're hearing, you know, really hearing this need for education, but also for specific types of supports and services that are reflective of the great diversity that we've been talking about today. So that was really important. Is there anybody that's been watching that wants to add a comment or a question?
I will. Hello?
Hi, who's that? Sorry, I have so many I
It's
can't.
Sandra. It's Sandra.
Hi, Sandra. Go ahead, Sandra.
You know what? I believe that yes, we do need education, but we also need inclusion. People have to include us because we know what we're talking about. So if they don't include us, then we can't speak out. So they have to include us. We know what's going on. So they have to really be able to include us in things.
Right. So Sandra, you're saying like, and I know Kelly and Andrea was shaking her head as well. Like it's the people that have lived the experience. It's not about just in a token way. It's like really have them there. Like when I hear you, and Sandra, correct me if I've got this wrong, but I hear you saying like, we need to be included. We need to be right there all the time.
Yes.
Right. It's not just one or two, but really kind of.
No, we have to. Yes.
Right. Okay. Thank you for that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Go ahead, B.
I totally agree what Carrie and Sandra say. You know, it's like a lot of time the government, you know, I mean, city is doing pretty good. You know, anything they want to implement, they usually have a consultation, you know, from the community, but not so much about province when they put out something. Favorite is learning, it's getting better. I mean, it's like that phrase say, you know, nothing about us without us, right? So we are the one who live in those experience, and we are the one who know what works, what doesn't work. So if the government have some program or whatever they want to put out, but without a consultation of the lived experience, sometimes it create unintended consequences. So
Can you give
sometimes
it, can you give an example of that? What's the unintended consequences when they don't have people with lived experience at the table?
for example, they like housing, right? They put the encampment people into this they want to clear those people in the park, the encampment people. So they put them, you know, to this supported housing. It's good, you know, in that sense, because a lot of encampment people, you know, some of them they had a mental issue, you know, but the problem is those encampment people, they have been living in a park. Sky is their roof, you know, they're so used to it. They don't have that experience living in a house, right? So for them to put them suddenly from to house, they cannot manage. To them, it's like they got confined in a place. They cannot breathe, you know. So they, because of that, most like 3 out of 4 people will go back to the street again, go back to a park again, because they're not so used to. So there should be a transition from park, transition, you know, like a community life, something like that, for them to get used to, you know, living in a house, I mean a place, and then slowly, and still with the community environment, and slowly move them to housing. Then they keep the house, they will maintain and not go back, because otherwise the cycle go round and round and never ended.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, that's an excellent point. I love the sky is their roof. That's amazing, because I've certainly seen that with, you know, that not understanding the multiple reasons people are unhoused, you know, and if you have people that are living it, guiding that work, we get to some of those issues. I hate to put Noah on the spot. Noah, are you there? May not be there.
Yes,
Yeah.
right
Hi,
here.
Noah.
Yeah.
I just wondered if
Right.
you could share a little bit about what we often talk about, like some of the housing issues in Iqaluit and in Nunavut generally.
Yes, first, thank you, everyone. It's great to hear everybody's side of information. I support everyone's mission for inclusion. Yeah, like I said, in Nunavut, we have 25 communities that we are supporting. And Iqaluit is the capital, which is the 25th community. And we are in remote places. At this moment, we're in a housing crisis situation. And at the same time, the mental health issue is trying to be addressed at this point. But more importantly, as we are the community, the city, for other communities to come here for hospital information, etc. The services are just finally starting to open, but there's so much to do. You know, safety is always a priority. And at this point, the safety thing is not really being addressed within the capital. That as we go further to communities, it's a different story. There's a lot of lack of information, a lot of lack of communication with these issues on disability services. When Nunavut was created in 1999, disability services were going to be part of the equation, but they dropped the ball after the 3rd, 5th year when Nunavut got into a deficit. So at this point, again, we're talking about 25 communities, and disability has grown into a huge number. Right now, our hearing issue is the biggest problem. We need to address this problem. 80% of the population either has hearing loss or hearing impairment of the population, and that's significant. We have 3 regions. I'm on Baffin Island, that represents 11 communities. And there's Kivalliq, that represents 7 communities. And there's Keewatin, that represents 6 more communities. So we're talking about 25 communities altogether. And not everyone within each community has an advocate. I think there's a lot of good opportunities for us across Canada to address issues, which is on an emergency basis, as we are. It is unfortunate that we have a borderline. We're about 30 years behind the rest of Canada. And this needs to be stopped if we're especially talking about inclusion. I welcome everyone to Canada. I'm born and raised in Nunavut. Nunavut's been here since millennia. So I welcome you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Noah. And I mean, I think when you're talking about those high rates of disability that you're talking about, like there's also, as I know from you, and you could add more to this, but there's the issue that the multiple layer being Inuit and some of the language issues and you mentioned it, the mental health based on the historical trauma. Is that something that you would add to that we're not just talking about disability here?
Yes, totally. There's a huge significant language barrier, which needs to be addressed. And, more we work together, the better. I think the services needs to be understood properly, especially through airlines or especially within the public sector, how we can help more better to understand what kind of services need be or to understand the patient. There's some issues, unfortunately, that happens, but there's a lot of issues that we have with asthma up here at the same time. And you cannot remove an ventilator because the person has a harder breathing or has a heart problem because due to their lungs or heart.
Mhm.
But when they remove it, there was an argument who's in charge of this, either the airline or the government. I think there should be a better understanding between this situation, especially dealing with health. I think both sides need to work together, that things should be available. And more importantly, communicate better. There's so much we can work together with here.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Andrea?
Yes, I just want to emphasize as well that most of us are all wanting to say the same thing, that is so important that we become an allyship with each other, like with the disability community leading the way, not just, deaf people, but hearing people, but this allyship that we have to have, that we listen, we action. For example, there are so many things that the gaps, that are missing. And it's terrible when we're talking about nurses and simple procedures, or for a deaf person, it's just the basic rights that should be there and that aren't there. So we need to have more groups where we have that support and allyship all together so that we can make this work. Here in Canada, there are areas that are isolated for a long time. We need to expose that. We need to speak up. We need to get the help and access for services. We need funds, housing, homes, safety. The list is so many, but we can't do it just on our own. So we need really to get leadership to be involved, to activate, to support, so that we can all go lead together.
Wow, that's great, Andrea. And what I'm hearing from that, when you're talking about allyship in this context, it's allies with other BIPOC people, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I'm hearing. Yeah. Anybody else that's been listening want to have a comment or ask a question? It's a quiet bunch.
Sorry, I
Alex.
don't use
Oh, sorry.
the hand raise function on this. for
Oh,
some-
sure. Go ahead. Derek first and then Alex, okay?
Oh, sorry, Alex.
No, that's fine. It's probably me because I can't see.
Okay.
There's a lot of people. Okay, go ahead, Derek.
I just wanted to ask folks about especially interactions with hospitals, because I've noticed a lot of racism toward disabled BIPOC folks in hospitals, particularly Indigenous folks in hospitals. One of my friends, for example, had a heart attack, went to 3 different hospitals, and during the process, each one of them rejected her and told her she was, quote unquote, probably drunk because she's Indigenous. And so I've noticed this intense racism that is happening in hospital environments for folks that are BIPOC and disabled, and that combination evoking like racism from front-end practitioners. So I wondered if folks could talk about the need for that experience of educating hospital workers, particularly frontline workers, but also doctors and nurses. Would folks be comfortable talking about that?
Thank you, Derek. Does anyone want to respond from the panel? I know, Kelly, you have a lot to say about that in the past, but anybody can respond.
I think that, well, I know like in Toronto, some of the hospitals have where they want to hire, or they do have hired like Indigenous social workers or like a support worker where they can help specifically Indigenous individuals navigate the healthcare system on a cultural and barrier-free basis. One example, like a Women's College Hospital in Toronto, they recently started a program that is strictly Indigenous workers, and one is a healer. I met actually with a few of them, and they help the women navigate if they need anything from addiction to mental health. They also tie them in automatically with the healer so that they can have that cultural component, because it's very important when an individual, no matter what, leaves the hospital. Like, I think that there should be more of that. And as far as for training, these are things education wise, cultural, that should be taught, like in various courses, such as if someone's going to be a lawyer, a nurse, or whatnot, there should be that cultural sensitivity component. And to me, I think that might help as well, so that, you know, these individuals that get in these kind of frontline fields are aware and they have that understanding of how better to work with these communities. But the same issue that you just mentioned, that happens in Toronto, and even like back home, that where I'm from, like that happens. So I really think it's making changes to the education system too. And also, if there could be, I know different organizations and things, it's hard to do the funding and things to get a position and that created, but I think there should be like more peer support workers out there that, you know, have these kind of lived experiences, so that they can help too as well, advocate with these individuals maybe that are freshly new on their healing path, address these concerns with these frontline workers. So I'll just kind of leave it at that. And if
Thanks,
anybody else,
Kelly. That's
and-
great.
Thank you so much, Kelly.
Thank you. Alex?
I didn't particularly I have a lot of questions, but not enough questions for 6 minutes. So I would just leave it as a comment to say I really appreciate everyone who shared their story today, including sharing some of the trauma from the past, which I'm sure is not easy to share again. So I just want to say thank you for everyone who shared their story. I learned a lot over these last 2 hours. It's been very insightful and eye-opening. So thank you.
Thanks, Alex. Any other comments or questions?
Yeah, Noah here, here in Nunavut.
Yeah.
For the services, like I said, Iqaluit being the capital, we have a hospital. We just recently got 2 doctors. So either way, again, that's good, but not actually addressing our the whole bigger picture. Because we're on remote places, and the only closest place we can go to is by plane. And the services, again, I agree with that lady who said we need to have peer support within the community, which we had within Nunavut, but it was dismantled due to new territory. So when Nunavut was created, we had whole whack of people working together, especially in the field of family social services, people going to a jail, or people who has mental problem or disability issue. Everyone worked together, but that was dismantled. I think there's a lot of good things that we can achieve together as Canada as a whole. And really, I agree with the lady. I think that, again, no barriers should be attached to this kind of work what we're doing. And I think it's very important that we have an open mind,
Right.
especially if we're talking about inclusion. Thank you.
That's great. No, I'd love to hear more. We're running out of town, but I like in terms of the process of dismantling some of the maybe natural supports that were there when the territory was sort of created, I guess. But we can hear more about that. I think we can have time for one more question or comment, and then we'll close this event.
I have one. Marilyn
Yes.
from Kiwasa.
Ah,
Hi,
great.
guys.
Oh, hi, Marilyn.
I came late, and but I do have I want to make a comment because I remember I'm a domestic violence prevention worker, and I remember a First Nation person who was working there at Kiwasa, and she was also facing domestic violence. And at some point, the police attended, and they didn't provide any services to her because she had been drinking. And I thought, oh, I couldn't believe it, right? That they didn't take it seriously. And then I said, I offered her support if to go, and she didn't want to, because that had happened many times. So people who has a lot of pain, and then they are using the different ways that people use to cope with pain. The police, this is a long time ago, maybe that this has changed, but I totally agree that it's really important to have other people who have similar, like the peer support people, going with the police or going with the social workers or the Ministry of Children, a family. That's what I wanted to say. I really like that idea, because they don't know, and like the other people, they don't understand, and that's all.
Right. No, thank you so much. And I think that's something we've been hearing really loud and clear throughout these 2 hours, is that the leadership has to come from the people that are living and most impacted by the structural and systemic barriers that have been placed in society. I just can't thank you enough. I mean, I know you all, some of you really well, some of you new acquaintances, thank you. But your contribution, and just, I just want to echo what Alex said, like, there's difficult things that you share, but you share them for a reason. And, you really want people to understand the depth of marginalization and your experiences, but each and every one of you is a very strong advocate. You continue to do the work, and I feel blessed that I've been able to be involved and work with some of you, and I know everybody that attended this really appreciates it. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
And
Thank
to
you. Have a
everybody-
good day, everybody.
Yeah, thank you everyone for attending. Please be in touch. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
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 Well, Alan.
Bye. Thank you, Lana. Bye, B. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.